Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Mike, how we doing?
We are doing good. You know, we do this show monthly, Michael, but it feels weekly. Time just flies in between our episodes.
We were just making a joke that it wouldn't be long before Tori was hitting us up about scheduling the next guest. So here we are, and we got an all-star joining us today, Alan. So I've known you for a while. I've had the pleasure of working with you now for a little over 4 years. But if you wouldn't mind taking a moment just describing yourself, your history, how you got here, Alaris Acquisitions. We actually had Jacqueline on the show, but that was probably a year and a half at least ago. So maybe just a refresher of who you guys are and how we got here.
Yeah, great. Well, my background is in wealth management. I had my own practice for about 25 years. And so nothing really interesting about that other than I grew it by acquisition. So this is way before acquisitions were really a thing. And so we did 9 acquisitions as an owner of a wealth management firm. So that's sort of how I got my toes wet. I sold the business. So I went through the process as a seller as well. So I know what that journey is like emotionally and intellectually. And then I guess notably, which really launched us into Alaris was I was a buyer advisor to United Capital. And so that was back in 2012. I took over their outbound M&A as a buyer advisor. So I was exclusive to them. They were my sole client. And so I was the guy going around the country knocking on doors for United. We did 30 plus acquisitions for them during that period. So it was a phenomenal time. And then we sold to Goldman Sachs and the show was over. So when that was done, I decided to launch Alaris, which was to be a sell-side advisor. And so that was the impetus for starting Alaris. And really, we're a traditional sell-side advisor in that capacity, meaning we solely focus on helping sellers go through the process of partnership. We say that very specifically because most of our clients are not exiting the business. In fact, they're rolling a portion of the valuation into the buyer's equity. So vetting, it is a true partnership. Vetting that life on the other side is important. I think what makes us a bit unique in that is how we go to market. So most sell-side advisors, when they work with their clients and they bring them to market, their mechanism for doing it is, we call it an auction, even though most of them don't like that word, but it's what it is.
I think the fact that most of them don't like that word probably means you're hitting a little close to home.
Yeah, we're told repeatedly, and I won't ask you to say this, but the buyers know the auctions. But the basically, it's like, let's invite as many buyers into the process as we can. They sign an NDA, they get the SIM deck on the seller, and it's like maybe respond to like an RFP style list of questions that we would have for you as the buyer, and then give us your offer. And so with very little, if any, communication between the buyer and the seller, the buyers are asked to put forth these offers, and so these spreadsheets.
In many cases, no communication.
Yeah,
a lot of times it's a blind bid. We have no idea if we decide to participate, what we're looking at.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking when buyers. I've had many of them just explain the stuff that they're asked to do without any discussion with their potential partner, the seller. So, but anyway, they all put their bids in, and then the sell-side advisor just eliminates the bottom quarter or so, and they advance the remainder to the next round, and they do it again. And so it's this very math-centric screening mechanism. And the obvious thing to me is like a buyer, they know if they're in a multi-round auction, they're going to have to last. So they retain dry powder in those initial offers, but in doing so, they risk being eliminated due to the insufficiency of the offer. And so anyway, but that's what my competitors use. And even the ones that don't say they use an auction, if you ask them, explain the steps, it's going to sound just like that. Right. And so once they narrow the field of buyers to what they would consider a workable list of maybe 10 or 15, that's when they start having interactions with the buyer and the seller. So the seller, it just seems wrong-headed to start there when both the buyer and the seller, if you ask them, like, what's the most important thing to get right? They're both going to say cultural fit. That's the thing. Now, they define that differently, but that's what they both want to be happy on the other side of the transaction. We know the seller wants to maximize their valuation. I mean, that's obvious. But our clients wouldn't sacrifice their clients or their team for another turn of the multiple, and so the good news is I don't think you have to. So what we do is different.
No, not at all.
we try to measure compatibility and invite buyers to the process based on the optimal nature of their compatibility with the seller. And so what we do is like we have with Carson, like we have spent, I don't know, 30 hours with you guys onboarding you into our what we call being on our roster. You're not our client, but you're just on the roster, and you've agreed to share your data with us. And so it's this massive amount of objectively measurable data that any seller would want to know in order to determine if they're a fit. So for example, if the let's use an easy one. Let's say that the seller needed Fidelity as a custodian.
Right.
Well, you have Fidelity as a custodian. That's a data point. That's objectively measurable. Same thing could be applied to the seller says they want 20% of their valuation in equity. Well, does that match with your acquisition model? So, and those are really easy things. Like, so there's multiple layers of these questions, many of them that have context around them, that would point them or eliminate firms from consideration. And so we've captured all that data. We go on site. So as we've done with you, we've done all the buyers. We go to visit their headquarters. We record videos with their leadership and their department heads. So it's this massive amount of data. And that all feeds into our AI algorithm. We call it the lens technology. And what it allows us to do is curate the buyers to a much smaller list. Instead of inviting 50, we typically only invite 5 buyers to a process, but we know going into it the degree of fit, at least on paper, and so I can tell the seller, this buyer checks all of your boxes, and where they might be a little bit of disconnect. And the same thing is, it's a two-way compatibility screen. I know when we invited Carson to a match, for example, they clear all of your filters as well.
Right.
So it's a much different way to matchmake, but and then we get out of the way. Like, we don't want to be the gatekeeper between the parties.
Right.
We want to facilitate the communication, and so that you can get to a point of cultural conviction. And I think, going back to the punchline of evaluation, when a buyer is rooted in cultural conviction, I mean, when you fall in love with a firm and you've got to have them, that's when you'll be aggressive in price and terms, not in auction fever. So that's
exactly.
We're different in the matchmaking. So
we're obviously honored to be a part of that. And, we've been successful in a number of processes and unsuccessful in more. But what I appreciate in particular about the Alaris process, and I've shared this with you before, just in one-on-one communication, is I think we all know that firms and Mike and I's peers at other firms, when we see an opportunity come in from a firm that runs a more traditional auction process, it goes to the bottom of the pile from a priority standpoint, from how aggressive we want to be. We know it's going to be a dogfight, and it's going to take probably twice as long as a culture-led process. So when I look to an opportunity from you guys, and you look at the maybe 4 other competitors, if we make that screening, they're firms that look and feel a lot more like us. I'm not going to see a firm that focuses solely on institutional retirement plan business, because that's not who we are, or all on pension consulting or something like that. They're going to be firms that, if you were to ask me who should be in a list, a relatively short list of firms that would be interested in firms like we would be, it makes sense. So it is a different process.
It is. And I ask myself, we ask ourselves, why don't more advisors use this process? It seems like obvious that should be a part of what we're doing as the advisor to the client. And the only thing I can surmise is that the time it takes, like this thousands of hours of time. We have
a lot up front.
Just hired another full-time person. We have 2 full-time people. That's all they do is maintain buyer relations and data now, so it's a massive commitment, but it allows us to run a far different process that should result in a better outcome for both parties, because we're only talking to firms that we should be talking to. And I think it produces a better economic outcome too.
Yeah.
So hopefully.
And I would assume from the seller standpoint, it probably leads to more referrals back to you guys being a trusted advisor for them. Because some of the things I hear from other advisors is, well, they're a little bit biased. They feed into the same few buyers because it's easier. To your point, it would be much easier for you and your firm in a far less time if you just had your same few buyers that you were always going to feed to, and you weren't as concerned with it being a good culture fit. But in the end, is that going to be a good experience for the seller? And is that going to be something where they're like, hey, Alaris is a great trusted resource. You guys should utilize them.
Well, it's funny you said that because we've been in a few competitions with our competitors, and that was one of the questions that I gave the prospective client to ask of the other firms is like, how many buyers have they engaged with and done transactions with? We actually looked at that recently, and we've done, as Alaris, we've done transactions with over 27 different buyers.
Yeah.
And so, and
that's a breadth.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is true. Like it means that speaks to my point, Mike, is like if you don't have the data, it's very difficult to maintain this amount of data on that many firms, and so it's just easier if you have your 5 go-to buyers that you're just repeatedly bringing the same transactions to over and over again.
Well, yeah. and as a testament to that, I'm working with one of your opportunities right now, and they asked to speak to someone at Carson, an advisor who'd gone through the process. And it just so happened that someone close to them was an advisor that came to us through your firm. And I reached out to that individual, and they said, happy to, would love to talk to them. That's great. It's fantastic. They're using Alaris, and I can tell them about the Carson experience along with that and how that worked. So it leads to even further success down the road. Right, with those advisors having felt trusted, that they made a good choice, and that you were truly unbiased and were able to put them in front of the correct few buyers out there that were going to be fit specifically for them, not just what's the best and easiest for you and your firm.
That's a good point, because we hear so much about the depth of the buyer pool now. Like I don't know how many buyers there are in the country, hundreds probably, but like credible buyers.
Technically, right, right.
But people think, oh, there's 100 buyers out there. And it's like, okay, well, let's say that that's true. That doesn't mean there's 100 buyers for you.
Right.
You have a very specific set of circumstances, business realities, structural things in your business, so all 100 buyers aren't going to be interested in you, and you're not going to be interested in them. It's probably more like maybe 10 or 15,
right?
Really, that you should focus on. The question is, how do you find those 10 to 15? And that's what we've attempted to do by having so many buyers that have engaged us, and then being willing to invest the time to really dive deeply, so that we can, when you come through our process, you're being screened against all of them.
Yeah.
So get instant exposure to the broad buyer pool.
Well, in the transaction timing too, when you look at a transaction, typically this is a longer sales cycle. Like, these are not usually opportunities that decide to sell and pull the trigger in 3 weeks. As a matter of fact, typically speaking, by about the end of this month, we kind of have the year baked. I mean, we know what's going to close this year versus what's likely a 27 opportunity, and anything, especially if it's coming through an auction process that comes in the door in the next, call it 35 days, realistically, that's going to look more like a 27 deal. Because if you think about the whole cycle, call it a year process. And if you go to an investment bank and you're kind of working through a traditional auction process, there's a few months there where you're building out sim materials and data before you go to market. And I would argue that most of the time, if we see an opportunity like that, we're kind of in the second inning. Whereas I think with the process that you've outlined, and just speaking from experience with Alaris, generally speaking, it's more like the fourth or fifth inning. They've kind of done that whittling. They know who's a fit and who probably is not. I actually steal your phrase. I try to attribute to you every time I use it, but the mandatory points of alignment.
Yeah.
And I do think there's a ton of wisdom there in what are your 5 have-to-haves. And if it's 10, it's 10, whatever it is. It just might limit the amount of buyers that would be interested. But likewise, we have our own. And if you can match those up, then you're going to have a much more fruitful management conversation around structure and culture and all of that prior to really having to worry about, due diligence and transaction timing and all of that. So
Sure. Yeah, no, it's true. I'm getting ready to give a presentation later today on our technology and like how it actually filters buyers. And it's very cool to watch. It's like you put in a data point, such as like, show me all the buyers who accept client custody.
right.
Okay. And it produces a list of like, okay, these are the 12 out of 90. Okay. And then you add another data point. Okay. Show me the buyers who allow you to accept custody and espouse an evidence-based like DFA type investment philosophy. Shrinks the list again. And then add in another data point. How many buyers accept client custody, espouse an evidence-based investment philosophy, and will permit up to 30% in an equity rollover in their model. 3 really kind of odd criteria, but it just filters all the buyers down to 3 names.
Right.
And so now we're doing that on a much broader set of data, but if you do it properly, it'll really narrow in. Like we're told repeatedly that by our clients is like they have such a hard time choosing amongst the buyers that are in the process because the match was good, and they're struggling to figure, because they're all ostensibly good partners for them, so that's a good output for us.
Because you've already eliminated the low hanging fruit, so they're not able to easily eliminate anyone from that because you've already done that filtering down. Yeah,
that's right.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious on a few more of the examples of like the intangible items, not the easy ones of, is Fidelity a custodian? They do the 30% rollover. Are there any examples of ones that are a little more intangible, a little bit harder to filter on from one data point? And it's more of from your experience of working with that buyer and how they operate as a firm and their general other culture items. Are there any other data points you guys track?
Well, and Mike, I'll add to that. I mean, because that ostensibly leads into the point of the conversation today, really, which is solving for sort of creative items, whether it be through a deal structure or the right buyer. So, I mean, I think this kind of launches us into the broader conversation really well.
Yeah. Well, easily, I would say the things that tend to be a little bit more difficult or nuanced to solve for tend to be around autonomy issues. Meaning the reality is that, the seller today, they make all the decisions in their world. And when they transact with anybody, there's going to be a change in that decision-making matrix, autonomy. And so it's a matter of really drilling down on what the seller is frankly comfortable to divest versus the things that are near and dear to the heart. And because most of them, they come into it with like this binary thought. It's like, we control all the decisions today. If we sell and transact, we're not going to control any decisions. And that's not the reality. It's more like a spectrum of autonomy. There are certainly buyers that when you sell to them, you're going to adopt a lot of their processes and standards and ways of doing things. But there are buyers on the other end, their model is inherently entrepreneurial. They're going to acquire you, centralize the back office, and leave you alone. And most of the buyers are in between. So we've really got to dive into what are they. We have 6 areas of decision making: strategic, financial, the client experience,
investments,
staffing. That's in the client experience. You're planning
sure.
Your staff, your calendar, and your growth profile. And we want to unpack all of those areas and figure out, okay, what do you want to keep versus what do you want to get rid of? We very rarely have someone fight over compliance, for example. But they do.
Shocker there.
Yeah, investments tend to be an area that they tend to say, hey, we like what we're doing. We want to continue doing it. So like that, to me, would be the stuff that's probably the most nuanced, is matching them given their autonomy profile. And to your point, Michael, we call it, from the buyer's perspective, it's the mandatory points of alignment. What are the things that you are going to require them to do, change, or adopt on your team? And so if we get the autonomy profile dialed in for the seller, we already know it for the buyer on their mandatory points of alignment, and we marry those two. And that, but that's easily probably the most nuanced part of it.
I mean, to a certain extent, Michael and I talk a lot about wearing the hats you want to wear after the transaction closed, right?
Yes.
Okay, you wear a lot of hats today. which ones do you really enjoy wearing and they are really important to you that you want to continue to wear? And which ones are you okay taking off and saying, hey, my potential buyer, I would love it if they took that over. And it kind of aligns here of there's based off those 6 data points that you laid out, there's probably a lot of things, for example, we hear a lot, hey, like me being able to manage my team in terms of their PTO and bonus for the year and those sort of personnel type items. I really enjoy that. That's the side of the business I really like. But when it comes to, vendors and
I hear the opposite, Mike.
Those sort of things.
I was going to say that.
On my side, it's the opposite. It's can you do the performance reviews? Because I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. Well, right. So, but to that point, you're going to have different answers from different advisors, right? Depending on what they want to do. And I would imagine that certain buyers out there, sorry, from the seller's perspective, I would imagine certain buyers out there have different answers to that. Yes, that is something that that can be local level, right? And those sort of things can be done in the local office, or no, those are more home office types of items. So I would imagine you could even filter based off of how what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and how they want that to work.
So for us, that's a practice management area. So like there's buyer, I know Carson does a great job of this. Like you have internal resources that come alongside us to help us manage the people, manage the business, track KPIs that should be tracked. These are things that most probably small business owners in our space, they don't have the resources to do that. They don't have the skill. They don't have the desire. My team knows this. We have 14 people now, and I don't like managing people. I'm not good at it. Frankly, thank God my partner is. But practice management isn't something that comes natural to me. And there's a lot of entrepreneur business owners that, they're really good at bringing in business. They're really good at closing clients and serving their clients, but they're not great at running the business.
Right.
And that's not a slight. It's just, that's probably the majority.
It's a different skill set. I mean, these are most of the time we're talking about fierce entrepreneurs that got into the business because one, they love helping clients. Two, they oftentimes love managing money. And these are people that are not, they didn't choose a desk job for a reason, which is why I think subjectively the conversation around autonomy and control is so fundamentally important when we talk about what's next and what life would look like post-transaction. We get the question all the time, who controls my calendar? And I don't know that I've ever heard you actually mention that as being one of the points, but for these folks that have been in business for and by themselves for so long, the idea that they would have to submit a PTO request is anathema. We have an office in Anchorage. When I was up there with Mike Kushelansky, we were having a conversation. He made the comment. He goes, January is PTO for me. I take my family and we might go around the world or do whatever we want to do. Do I have to get that cleared? I go, no. Let me be clear. We don't use PTO for our advisors. If you're an advisor, you're paid by what you do.
Well, it is something that I find they're generally concerned about, because I don't know where they get these thoughts. Like they're going to be
wirehouses.
Yeah. The reality is, you guys were entrepreneurs. You're just a larger version of them. You're acquiring an entrepreneur. The worst thing or the last thing on your mind is turning them into robotic employees. You're bidding. Yeah. It's the opposite. You want to take things off their plate so they can run faster, and do more of the stuff that they love. But that's something that we've got to really explain and they're surprised at it a lot of times. Oh, I thought I was going to have to punch a clock or, get permission. No, they don't care.
We actually probably lean more on the other side. Realistically, when we talk about, we just welcomed our 45th integrated office on this week. So 45 of these firms now, we have 45 different sort of fee schedules and 45 different approaches to investment management and 45 different schedules on when they're going to be in or out of the office. And Bert does a nice job of sort of explaining that when we're looking for a potential partner, the absolute last thing we want to do is suck that entrepreneurial spirit out of them and say, hey, welcome to McDonald's. The fry oil is always going to be set at this temperature. You're going to drop the patty for exactly this much time on the grill. But that's how you take a firm that's in growth mode and turn them into a stagnant lifestyle practice, in my opinion.
Well, and we've seen that, right? We've seen a lot of
Yeah.
firms where their initial growth, when it is just that one advisor and maybe one ops person, their NNA growth is extremely impressive. And you're looking at their chart, and then you see it stagnant for a little bit, and you talk to them, and you ask why. Like, okay, well, that's when I hired my first employee, and then I started hiring again. And they started spending more and more time in that world and less on what made them successful in the beginning. Okay. And our goal is to take you back to that initial stage, right? Bring you back to where you are solely focused on what you're good at and what got you into the business to begin with. Take away all those things where it started to stagnate, where you were kind of that accidental CEO and you were doing things that maybe you didn't want to do and maybe weren't necessarily your core competency, right? Take you back to that. So Alan, I love the way you phrase that because it's so true. All the buyers are there. That should be their goal, is to get them back into that mode, eliminate the distractions and allow them to do what they do best.
Yeah, and there's psychology around that too. I mean, they're going from the sole entrepreneur, or maybe one of several entrepreneurs in a firm, in a partnership, and going through the emotional high of a transaction. I think it's naturally followed by a little bit of a low. That your baby has ceased to maybe be your baby the way you sort of always thought it would be. And the sooner that the advisor can make that switch, Mike, and get back to thinking about all the fun reasons we chose to partner with Carson as an example. And that's when they start seeing that growth take off again, is you got to show them that path and have somebody sort of coach them through that, which is easier said than done, frankly.
It's always the emotional stuff that gets in the way more than reality.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And I'm always so curious, Alan, how much of your job is more therapist and advisor? You wear a lot of different hats in there as you're coaching these sellers through this process.
Yeah, I know you guys wanted to talk about things that go bump in the night, like structurally or what have you, like, and that are interesting that we've had to work through. And as I was pondering it coming into it, like 90% of them are not structural. It's like emotional.
Yeah.
And so my partner Jacqueline and I, we call it the freak out moment. We don't know when it's.
You call it something different when you're not on camera, don't you? We do.
Well, I tell everybody, every seller we work with, I was like, it's going to happen to you. I don't know when it's going to happen, but you're going to lose it emotionally through this process at some point, because you get deal fatigue is a very real thing. So there's a lot of like hurdles to overcome as you're going through this journey. And they bubble up into a point where they pop, and so like I've taken calls at Sunday night at 11:30 p.m., from people that are, getting ready to sign documents, and you got to talk them off the ledge. So that, to me, like it's always the emotional irrationality that creeps in, and it usually it's on the side of the seller. Sometimes I've seen it happen on the side of the buyer too, but it's usually like seller emotion, and it's not always just the owners.
Right.
It could be their teammates.
Especially depending on the level of communication that's been happening between the founder and those staff members or second generation advisors.
Well, we just had that happen. I think you feel the same way, but we encourage our clients, like, when do you tell the team? And typically, earlier is better for me.
Yes.
And they're going to find out. You got to get that through your head. They're going to find out at some point. It's better to come from you than to come from somewhere else. And but I think the appropriate time is around the time where you've narrowed the selection of who you're going to partner with to one, maybe two, but hopefully, preferably one. But the decision is not like done. You're still dating and courting them, but you've decks. But that's an excellent time to do so. Because if you do it right, I mean, they're concerned their job's going to be taken away, their compensation is going to be altered, and their opportunity is going to be diminished. And none of those are happening. So we want to get that on the table early. We want to involve them in the process so they don't feel like they're done to. So, but I do that every time with our clients. Like, early conversation with them is like, when are we going to tell the team? I'm often involved in telling the team. But we had a client that, shame on us, like we didn't like follow up on that. And they were at LOI, and we were talking to them, and they mentioned they hadn't told their team yet. And I was like, oh, wow, we really missed that.
That was your freak out moment.
It was my freak. I was like, man. And then their head of operations found out about it like the next day. Somehow they got wind of it. And she really had a hard time with it. Like, she felt almost betrayed. And because she'd been there, I think 15 years or so. And it was like putting the cat back in the hat at that point.
Yeah.
It actually caused a little bit of distrust to creep in between the relationship between the owners and this long-term employee. And the owners had no malintent. They actually were feeling like they were protecting their team from, undue nervousness or what have
Right.
you.
Right.
Again, like that's something that is a problem that if you're going through the process, you need to get your team involved in it before they found out on their own, because then, it's like it's Pandora's box. You want to control the narrative.
There's only so many times you can take a call from your car or the Starbucks around the corner from the office before things start getting out. And I agree. I mean, when I look at the most successful transitions we've had, it has been because of two things. They've communicated with the staff early, and the staff has been sort of co-opted. They've bought into the process. They see the opportunity for themselves, and they're helping the advisors get this thing over the line. And then two, they've also communicated with their clients well in advance, so that when the DocuSigns are going out and folks are starting to see assets in motion, clients are ready for it. So the more proactive communication, obviously you don't want to do it too early. Like you don't want to tell somebody when you're first engaging an advisor like Alaris. I agree. I wait until you've narrowed that down. But I think the minute you start doing like on-site visits or folks come out to see you, it gets a lot harder.
We have a firm that's in phase with you guys right now, and they're coming out to Omaha, right? And so we had when we were going to tell the team conversation a week ago, and they're like, well, I guess we better have it now, because when all four of us go out to Omaha, someone's going to get
it's going to happen. We have an office in transition right now that the first time I went to go see them, they didn't have any sort of advisor. This was a sort of an organic deal that came together. There was some connections with one of our existing offices, but I had to show up at the office at 5:30. They wanted to make sure everybody was out before I came in. So I got to see the office, but it was empty. It was like the day after the rapture, like nobody's there.
Well, and to your point out on the LOI, I think there's a mentality too from a lot of those team individuals of if they're finding out after any form of document, right? And we know LOIs can be in all forms of how solidified that is and what's actually going to end up in the definitive documents. But if something has been signed and then they're finding out, it's that feeling of, okay, but if I had feedback or if I had questions, comments, concerns about how this is going to go, it's too late. Right, because the document has been signed, and there's
even if it's just a perception.
Correct. Yeah. Even if it's just a perception, right? Us three know that that's not the case. There's a lot of things that can happen between LOI and closing, and we can adapt to things that come up. But from their perspective, a document has been signed. Okay, well, what about my future? Like, did you negotiate for me pretty well? If I have questions, comments, concerns, how did that go? And they weren't involved.
Yeah. Well, we have different phases of our process, and after the buyer has been chosen, so we have the math, we've got the cultural fit confirmed by the owners. Mm-hmm. Now we call it, we go to the dating phase. And the dating phase is typically when we have the seller and members of their team appropriate for their role that have conversations with your team, not the deal people, not the executives, but it's the people that they would actually be working with. So the head of operations, the head of investments, the head of technology, all these people that if they're become a part of Carson, they're going to be working with. It's people who do the actual work. And we want the seller's team members to participate in those. And it's really positive because, one, they will give the owners feedback that they wouldn't otherwise get, because they're looking at it from an entirely different lens. So we find it, not only does it help kind of make them a part of the process so they don't feel like, again, they're done to, but it's really positive for the owners because they get to hear things that they wouldn't have probably heard or had the ability to discern.
Yeah, or even thought about, because frankly, those other team members are usually doing things that are complementary, not the same as what the advisor does every day.
Spot on. How many times do you hear that, right? You hear, well, I wouldn't have even appreciated that aspect of Carson that you brought to the table until I relayed that to my team member. And they're like, do you know how powerful that is? Because that's going to save me X amount of time. That's going to do this. And from the owner's perspective, it's just not their day-to-day. So it didn't connect with them as something that could be valuable for their team or that their team would see as a positive.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to Weird's not the right word. Maybe some of the more unusual things you've had to solve for, Alan. Mike and I have seen plenty just internally, but obviously you work with a much broader scope. What are just a few things that maybe the average listener who has not gone through a process, generally speaking, should be thinking about, or maybe something will resonate that you say that they go, oh man, that would be an issue for me. It's better to get that on the table now.
Probably the most substantial, common thing is if you've gotten commitments, let's say, to junior team members, typically they're advisors, that you've had like these handshake conversations around ownership or potential for ownership. It's are you removing opportunity for them vis-a-vis this external transaction? And so it's working through how do we retain incentive for that younger Gen 2 advisor, let's say, in that ownership capacity. And so working through that is a very common thing, where the owner is either going to allocate a portion of the deal to those team members in cash, or if the buyer permits equity, if they're going to use a portion of the earnout, that is that growth-based incentive post-acquisition to reward them. We've seen some buyers actually step in and start adding equity, on the offers. So it's like the offer to the owners, but then here's a subset that we're going to allocate towards the junior advisors. So that's usually a very common. So it's not odd per se, but it's like a very common thing that we have to work through is how do we get equity or incentives. And the reality is, as you guys think at Carson, you want the younger Gen 2 advisors.
I'm so happy you brought this up. This is a huge topic for us.
Yeah.
I think it becomes a real problem if you have a lot of second generation talented, entrepreneurial minded advisors that understand that the path to wealth creation is not an income, it's an equity ownership. And if they always thought they were going to be an owner of that firm, even if they had a completely unreasonable expectations around what valuation might look like, or what the process might look like, if you remove that as an option, you're going to see unhappy folks that will be running that firm in the foreseeable future. And it's something that Daniel Applegarth, our CFO, has sort of made it his personal mission to sort of address as much as possible. We actually, on a different deal right now, sort of outlined, like, these are the sort of 4 paths that we can get some equity units into the hands of a really talented second generation team. They got 4 advisors that are fantastic that are not currently equity owners. And it was sort of a, hey, option 1, you get them onto the cap table now, whether it's through sweat equity or a buy-in, you get units into their hands. And I should be clear, there are tax implications for all of this. So everybody should sort of have an individual conversation with their attorneys and their CPAs, but you get equity into their hands now so they can roll that over into ours. You wait until they're over and gift shares to them. Or we put together a profits interest plan that allows those second generation advisors to participate in upside. It's a little bit more tax efficient for them. Or fourth, we just announced a little bit internally that we're going to have an incentive program for high producing advisors, whether it's G1 or G2. Once they get out of an earnout period, they'll have the ability to earn or purchase additional shares. So we're now up to, Mike, hold me or keep me honest here, like 165, 170 advisor owners that we have now. That's not taking into account, obviously, our founder or the management team. And having that wide pool, I think, is a huge advantage for us. It protects any sort of downside once we have these G1s start exiting the business.
Well, everyone, like particularly highly acquisitive buyers, they're inheriting the succession issues, inherent.
Yeah, that's right.
So you aggregate all of these succession problems, and you got one massive succession problem. And so having, like you guys have, I think, one of the best Gen 2 recruiting mentoring programs in the country. But the thing that everyone needs to hear is how interested you are as the buyer to have equity in the hands of those younger people. It's like you get the natural binding that occurs when I'm a shareholder. I start thinking differently about my contribution and what I'm going to do to help grow the shareholder value. And so it's buyers in general want that. When I encounter buyers that like have no interest in equity being allocated to their partners, I mean, it just doesn't. It feels weird.
No, it's a huge red flag for us. We've had to be heavy-handed is not the right word, but highly encouraging. Every now and then where there's been a G1 owner that maybe had not thought this through. And I mean, I've told the story. My own parents used an advisor that they knew for a long time. They had a second generation. This gentleman thought he was going to inherit the business or buy it from the founder when she retired. She ended up selling it to a competitor firm of ours. He did not, or they did not. I have no idea, but he, I know, was not pleased with the transaction. And my parents saw the service levels drop almost immediately. And the proactive sort of outreach that had been happening kind of turned into a reactive, oh, we realize you haven't scheduled your annual review. And I always joke, I'm very pleased that they're now Carson clients. They're with our advisors, Jared and Casey out in Roseville. But those are the things that if you don't think through, you're not going to get the growth that you expect out of that firm. It's just not going to happen. And you may actually have retention issues.
So we get this, it's sort of like a bias that our clients come to the table with, is that you would rather pay for their practice with equity. And that's not the case. Equity is the most expensive way Carson can buy a firm.
Without a doubt.
Cash is way better. But, and so allocating equity is a very serious decision for you. Like if someone, I know this, but if someone said, hey, we want more than 30% in our valuation in Carson equity, well, you better have some pretty good historic growth metrics to back that up, you're on a northbound train. Because if you don't,
we need that conviction. Yeah,
Carson needs that, and so
right.
You're not going to want to allocate equity to someone who's not going to grow, because then it's dilutive to the other shareholders. And so
exactly.
So it's a very, like, I know I won't name them, but another strategic national acquirer that they used to do heavy equity transactions, and then they got more and more cash heavy transactions. And when they went back and evaluated the performance of their partners, it was the guys who took equity were the ones who were dominating the growth. And so they went back and said, we need to increase our requirement for equity in the deal. And so it's like, to your point, it's directly correlated in terms of their post-acquisition performance.
You turn them into advocates. I was just telling the story earlier this week. We had an office visiting us, a prospective seller. And while I was at dinner, I got a text from a retired founder of a firm that we transacted with over 3 years ago. And he said, hey, I was actually coming through Omaha the other day and had dinner at the steakhouse that we took that team when they were on site. And he goes, I was thinking about you and that dinner and how much fun it was. And he ends the conversation. He goes, by the way, keep at it. We love seeing that stock price go up. Thanks for letting me keep it in retirement. Like, you turn them into advocates, right, and they're all in. Like, they'll always be all in if it all, sort of works out and they hit their goals. So it's fun. It's fun being on the same side of the table with a lot of motivated, successful people.
Well, we've seen our clients that took, 20, 30% in equity, and 5 years later that slug of equity was worth more than the cash.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's a very real, that's why, people, some people don't like capital providers like PE firms because,
right,
all the negative connotations, but we love it because it's evidence of what someone was willing to pay for the equity, and if you had multiple recaps, there's multiple points of inference that you say this has real value. Some people want to discount the value of the equity because it's illiquid or they're not, and it's like, no. It's an actually real.
I think it speaks to the level of talent that firm will be able to attract as well once they sort of hit that. I mean, I think for Carson, when when we received that minority investment from Bain Capital, I do feel like that was a legitimizing event for the firm, to the street, that, hey, there's a different level of success and also financial rigor and expectation that's going to be placed on that firm now with an investment from a firm of the caliber that Bain is.
It's definitely
we're at what, 45 minutes already? Alan, give us one more. What's another item that you've had to sort of think through or again, maybe not be creative, but just be thoughtful around?
Okay. So we had one transaction. We have two partners, and one partner was more business development oriented than the other, and if you looked at like what was driving the growth of the business, it was attributed to one partner. And so we had this sort of issue when they were deciding what the post-acquisition roles and responsibilities were. The one partner who was not growth oriented was going to like be the manager, and the guy who was driving all the revenue was like really freaked out about reporting to his partner post-acquisition. These guys have worked together for years, but now it was like this hierarchy thing that we had to work through. So that's kind of an odd, it's like what people want to know, what's my role going to be, post-acquisition. And often they have, particularly with people who want to maybe expand their career trajectory. You probably have firms that come to you and want to do M&A, for example. They want to go help recruit, and so they get all excited about, maybe doing that, and they get their eye off the ball of the transaction itself. It's like, hey, we're writing a multi-million dollar check here for this business. We want to make sure that your eye is focused on that first.
Yeah,
and
we need you in it. Yeah.
We'll get to that other fun stuff later, but
yeah,
let's keep the eye on the prize. So, I would say post-acquisition role clarity is something we often have to try as best we can to work through, knowing that the buyer, they often struggle with it, but it's not because they're trying to avoid the conversation. It's just like they really have to work with you and get to know you and learn your talents and what you're really good at and capable at and want to do before they can really do that sort of thing, And so It's something that is more nuanced to try to work through, is like, what am I going to be doing 3 years from now? It's really hard to say.
Yeah. Mike, I'll bet you run into that quite a bit. I mean, for my world, so often these folks are outside the family right now. They're considering becoming part of the family. But for you, I would guess, a lot of these folks have been in the network for a long time. They've got a lot of personal friends that are other advisors here and or on the management team or sit here in Omaha. I would guess that excitement to ramp up or participate more is even higher on your side of the house.
Completely. And I agree with what Alan said. A lot of it is, okay, let's focus on the task at hand first, right? And let's focus on the value, the reason we're writing this multi-million-dollar check is due to this performance that your firm has done. And there's going to be an expectation, especially for the earnout period, that continues. Let's focus there. Yes, we know you have a lot of talents in X, Y, or Z area that we are excited to tap into as we go forward. But for right now, let's focus on this one piece. Let's focus on you continuing, getting you back to your growth path, how that's been working well. And it is, because I think, especially at a firm like Carson, right? Danny Fava's out there a lot. We're talking about AI. We're talking about the tech side. We're talking about a lot of cool things we're doing with tax and Debbie Taylor and planning. And a lot of our advisors have natural interest in that. And that's what they want to come in. Hey, I would love to, work with Danny or work with Debbie Taylor and work on that. And in due time, right? But that is one of the benefits too of being a buyer and making a lot of these successful acquisitions, is we do have a very deep talent pool now of a lot of diverse interests and experience levels of things like that. So we are enticed to go into that pool and say, okay, we have a lot of individuals, right? I joined Carson, we were less than 100 employees, and now we're over 500, right? There's a lot of great talent there. How do we best utilize that? But
you're a victim of your own success, Mike. I mean, it's funny. Just as you started going through that, though, you think about Debbie Taylor or Russ Nealon or Mark McCallum or any number of these folks that have taken wider roles. It's Jamie Carroll inside of the
Yeah.
organization that came directly out of a producing advisor role. Like everybody wants to be one of them when they grow up.
Right.
Mhm.
And trying to set the proper expectations, I can imagine, is something you got to work through.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's constant, and I get it. Like they want to, I could see working as an advisor for years, and you feel like you get this talent. Maybe you don't want to do what you've been doing exactly, and so you can start seeing a broad organization and what I could morph into. And you're all eyes wide open, arms wide open, willing to do that, but they just need to know that, hey, we got to take care of the asset that was just acquired.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you do get to sort of unlock those talents. I mean, I just Keys Tinney and Aveo, which is a firm, Alan, that thankfully we met and won because of the Alaris connection. And he is, in my opinion, one of the most talented individuals we've ever brought. And, getting to have conversations with people like that are just awe-inspiring in a lot of ways. And you're like, this is a guy that is going to drive growth for this firm for years. Yeah. Let's get the business over. And they did. And I know we're going to put him to work.
Yeah. He's
going to go out there and be a multiplier for us. All right, guys. Well, we are almost 52 minutes in. Alan, any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share with the community and listenership right now?
Something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it's just what is the impact of AI on valuations in the future, and no one really knows. It's like created like a widening of outcomes, and so it used to be like, there's a lot of firms out there that think they're 3 to 5 years away from transacting. There's this risk that they know, which is their business, versus the risk of the unknown joining another firm. But then there's this risk that they kind of dismiss, which is the broad market, because M&A has been so hot and valuations keep going. And I think that they might want to start paying a bit more attention to those risks.
Yeah. And
really revisit that timeline. I'm biased to say that because I'm a sell-side advisor, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. I
actually agree with you 100%. I mean, I think the devil's advocate sort of argument is that, hey, there's not a huge amount of daylight right now between the valuations of really large firms and maybe middle tier firms, other than what might show up in organic growth rates. I mean, we're there's a spread, but it's not a gigantic spread. But you're competing. Just to use an example, let's say you're a $500 million in asset firm with $2 million in EBITDA. You're competing against much bigger firms that are getting better and more efficient by empowering advisors using technology, of which AI is a large part of that, to service more clients with less time and have the same amount, if not better, client satisfaction. And if you are not keeping pace, you are going to be dilutive to the valuation of that larger firm.
So that's something that I literally just got up another podcast and I'm writing an article on it, and we'll can end on this, I suppose. But the assumption is always that there's a war for talent and the buyer wants to keep all of your team. And I think that's going to persist. But what's going to change, and I'll use this as a simple analogy. Let's say that you as an advisor can support 100 clients. That's your client load. Well, the buyer, because of their investment in tech, AI, that gives them immense scale, and we see this in our business. I have tasks that used to take me 20 hours, now it takes 10. And so when that happens, when the buyer is, let's say they can support 200 clients per advisor with the same or better service, how do they view that now? That staffing model that the seller has, you to your point, you're dilutive to the buyer. So like it's not, that is a real thing, and that could be evaluation. Down the road, it's like, we're not only can't pay a premium, we have to discount, because of the absorption.
Yeah, completely. And because every firm is going to have those metrics that they are charting, right, with the growth rate and the operational efficiency of all their advisors. And to your point, if you're looking at doing an acquisition, ideally those are additive, right? They're not dilutive to those certain metrics. And as this starts to become more applicable to advisors, it needs to be a key focus, because that is going to directly tie into multiple.
And so anyway, I just think people need to, the ones that are, if you're 10 years away, okay, fine. But like, if you're seriously think you're 2 to 3 years away, you might want to revisit that time frame. That's what I'm thinking. So anyway,
I agree. All right, guys. Well, another great episode. Alan, thank you so much for joining today. It was, it's always a pleasure. I can't believe it's been this long since, or this much time has gone by before we had you on, but really appreciate your thoughts. I am sure we will be seeing you, not just in processes, but hopefully on the conference circuit or at some of our industry events here pretty soon. So be well. I should also mention you are very soon to be a grandfather.
That's right.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Baby Knox is his name.
That's right. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks all.